A young black doctor, driven by nothing but pure passion for healing and an unshakable belief in human dignity, enters a hospital room each morning. He doesn't know the unconscious woman he's treating owns half the city's skyline. He doesn't know her family donated millions to keep this hospital running. All he knows is that she's a human being who deserves the very best care he can give. What he's about to discover when she finally opens her eyes will change everything. Not just his career, but his entire understanding of what it means to be seen, valued, and truly respected. This young doctor's unwavering commitment to excellence and humanity is about to unlock doors he never knew existed. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because tomorrow at the same time, we'll bring you another story of black people leading the way that you won't want to miss. Are you absolutely certain this young man should be handling our most critical patient? Dr. Catherine Wellington's voice sliced through the pristine hallway of Mount Sinai Hospital like a blade, each word carefully chosen to wound. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications that everyone within earshot understood perfectly. Dr. Andre Santos paused outside room 3-12, his hand frozen on the door handle. 27 years old, brilliant, and armed with credentials that would make most doctors envious. Yet here he stood, once again defending his right to practice medicine. The stethoscope around his neck suddenly felt heavier, like a chain rather than a symbol of his calling. "Dr. Wellington," Andre replied, his voice steady despite the familiar knot forming in his stomach. "Victoria Blackwood has been under my direct care for 14 days. Her neurological responses have improved measurably since I implemented the new treatment protocol." The medical director's ice-blue eyes narrowed as she studied him like a specimen under a microscope. The Blackwood family has contributed over $4 million to this hospital's expansion. We cannot afford to experiment. That word, experiment. As if his Harvard medical degree, his residency at Johns Hopkins, and his groundbreaking research on coma patients were all just elaborate games. Andre had heard variations of this conversation dozens of times, but it never got easier. Each challenge to his competence felt like a small death, a piece of his dignity chipped away. "With respect, Dr. Wellington, my patient's vital signs and neurological markers speak for themselves. I've documented every improvement, every positive response to treatment. The evidence is clear." Behind the medical director stood two other senior physicians, their faces masks of professional neutrality that barely concealed their discomfort. They'd witnessed this dance before. The brilliant young doctor forced to justify his existence, to prove he belonged in their world of privilege and prestige. What none of them knew was that inside room 312, Victoria Blackwood had been conscious for the past 3 weeks, trapped in her own body but fully aware of every conversation, every slight, every moment of prejudice directed at the man who'd been fighting tirelessly to save her life. And she was about to change everything. Andre stepped into Victoria's room, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. The morning light filtered through expensive silk curtains, casting soft shadows across the unconscious woman's face. Victoria Blackwood, heir to one of America's largest real estate fortunes, lay motionless in the hospital bed, surrounded by flowers that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Good morning, Victoria," Andre said softly, beginning his daily routine. "I know you're fighting in there. I can see the signs that others miss." He pulled up her chart on the tablet, reviewing the data he'd been collecting with scientific precision. Subtle changes in brain activity, micro-movements in her facial muscles, variations in her breathing patterns, all indicators that conventional medicine often overlooked. His master's thesis on altered states of consciousness had given him insights that few doctors possessed. "Your family was here yesterday," Andre continued, gently checking her pulse. "They're worried about you, but I told them you're stronger than they know. Your body is healing, and I believe your mind is too." What Andre couldn't see was the tear that wanted to form in Victoria's eye. The scream trapped in her throat. For 3 weeks she'd been fully conscious, unable to move or speak, forced to listen as her own family questioned whether this compassionate doctor was qualified to treat her simply because of the color of his skin. Andre began changing the dressing on her surgical incision with the same meticulous care he'd shown every day for 2 weeks. His touch was gentle, professional, and filled with a respect that Victoria had rarely experienced, even when she was conscious and surrounded by people who claimed to love her. "I've been thinking about your case," Andre said, his voice thoughtful. "There's a new study from Switzerland about targeted neural stimulation. It's experimental, but the results are promising. I think you might be a candidate." Victoria's heart monitor registered a slight increase in rhythm, so subtle that most medical staff would dismiss it as normal variation. But Andre noticed. He always noticed. "Did you hear that?" he asked, moving closer to examine her face. "Victoria, if you can hear me, if you're in there, I need you to know that I'm not giving up on you. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." The dedication in his voice, the unwavering commitment to her recovery, pierced through Victoria's paralysis like light through darkness. This man, whom her family had questioned and dismissed, was the first person in her 25 years of life to see her as more than her bank account or her social status. He saw her as a human being worth fighting for. The Blackwood family arrived like a storm system, their presence filling the hospital corridor with an energy that made staff members straighten their postures and speak in hushed tones. Charles Blackwood, Victoria's father, was a man accustomed to having his every word treated as gospel. At 62, he commanded boardrooms and social circles with equal ease, his silver hair and expensive suits serving as armor in a world where appearance often mattered more than substance.
"Where is this doctor?"
Charles demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been told no. "I want to speak with him immediately." Dr. Wellington appeared at his side like a shadow, her face arranged in the practiced expression of someone delivering bad news. "Mr. Blackwood, I've been reviewing your daughter's case with fresh eyes. Perhaps it's time to consider transferring her to a more experienced physician." "What do you mean?" asked Margaret Blackwood, Victoria's mother, her designer handbag clutched tightly against her chest. "Are you saying the current doctor isn't qualified?" Andre chose that moment to emerge from Victoria's room, his daily examination complete. The family's eyes fixed on him with the intensity of predators sizing up prey. He'd faced this moment countless times, but it never became easier. The weight of their judgment, the assumption that he needed to prove himself worthy of their daughter's life. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," Andre said, extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Santos. I've been caring for Victoria, and I have some encouraging news about her progress." Charles Blackwood's handshake was perfunctory, his eyes cold. "Progress? She's been in a coma for 4 months. What kind of progress could there possibly be?" "Her neurological responses have improved significantly," Andre explained, pulling up Victoria's chart on his tablet. "Brain activity has increased by 15%, and we're seeing consistent patterns that suggest cognitive awareness. I believe she's closer to consciousness than previous assessments indicated." Margaret's face brightened with hope, but Charles remained skeptical. "And you're certain of this assessment?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Andre had learned to read between the lines of such inquiries. They weren't questioning his diagnosis, they were questioning his right to make it. "I've been tracking her progress with advanced neurological monitoring," Andre replied. "The data is conclusive. In fact, I'd like to propose a new treatment approach that could accelerate her recovery." Inside room 312, Victoria listened to every word, her heart breaking and soaring simultaneously. This doctor, this man her family treated with such casual disrespect, was fighting harder for her recovery than anyone else in her life ever had. And she was about to show them exactly what that meant. Andre's proposal was revolutionary and risky, a combination of targeted neural stimulation and advanced cognitive therapy that had shown promise in European studies but remained largely untested in American hospitals. He presented his research with the passion of a man who'd spent sleepless nights analyzing data, consulting with international experts, and developing a treatment plan specifically tailored to Victoria's unique case. The protocol involves microelectrical stimulation of specific brain regions, Andre explained to the gathered medical team, combined with auditory and tactile stimuli designed to trigger conscious response. It's delicate work, requiring precise timing and constant monitoring. Dr. Wellington's expression grew increasingly skeptical. "Dr. Santos, this sounds like experimental medicine. The liability of doing nothing is greater." Andre interrupted. his professional composure cracking slightly. Victoria Blackwood is 25 years old. She has decades of life ahead of her. Traditional approaches have plateaued. This is our chance to give her back her future. The room fell silent. Several nurses exchanged glances, impressed by the young doctor's dedication. Even some of the senior physicians seemed intrigued by his proposal, though they remained cautious about supporting such an unconventional approach. Charles Blackwood, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "Doctor, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but my daughter's life isn't a laboratory experiment. We need proven results, not theoretical possibilities." "Mr. Blackwood," Andre replied, his voice steady despite the frustration building inside him. Every medical breakthrough started as theory. Organ transplants, heart surgery, even antibiotics were once considered experimental. The difference between experimental and revolutionary is often just time and courage. What no one in that room knew was that Victoria had been listening to every word. Her consciousness trapped, but fully aware. She'd heard her father's dismissive tone, witnessed the way the medical staff questioned Andre's qualifications, and felt the weight of prejudice that followed him through every interaction. But she'd also heard something else. Genuine caring in Andre's voice. A dedication to her recovery that transcended professional obligation. He wasn't treating her as a case study or a wealthy patient who deserved special attention. He was treating her as a human being whose life mattered. That afternoon, as Andre began the first phase of his experimental treatment, Victoria made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She was going to fight her way back to consciousness, not just for herself, but to show everyone exactly what kind of doctor had been caring for her. The neural stimulation began at 2:17 p.m., and for the first time in 4 months, Victoria Blackwood started her journey back to the world. The breakthrough came at 3:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, when the hospital corridors were quiet and most of the staff had gone home. Andre was completing his final rounds, checking on Victoria one last time before heading to his small apartment across town. The experimental treatment had been showing promising results for 3 days, with increased brain activity and subtle physical responses that gave him hope. "How are you feeling tonight, Victoria?" he asked softly, adjusting her pillow with the same gentle care he'd shown every day for 2 weeks. "I think you're getting stronger. The neural activity patterns are unlike anything I've seen before." He was reviewing her latest brain scans when it happened, a flutter of movement that made him freeze. Victoria's eyelids trembled, then slowly opened, revealing alert brown eyes that focused directly on his face. "Victoria?" Andre whispered, his heart racing. "Can you hear me?" She tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Dr. Santos?" The sound of his name, spoken with such clarity and recognition, sent shockwaves through Andre's entire being. After weeks of one-sided conversations, after fighting for her recovery against institutional doubt and professional skepticism, she was finally awake. "I'm here," he said, pressing the call button for the nursing station. "You're safe, you're in Mount Sinai Hospital. Do you remember what happened?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of confusion or fear. They were tears of gratitude and something deeper, respect, admiration, and anger at the injustice she'd witnessed while trapped in her own body. "I remember everything," she whispered, her voice growing stronger. "I heard them questioning you. I heard my family doubting your abilities. I heard Dr. Wellington suggesting you weren't qualified to treat me." Andre's face went pale. The idea that she'd been conscious, listening to every slight, every moment of professional disrespect, filled him with a mixture of horror and vindication. "Victoria, you saved my life," she interrupted, her voice clear now despite the weeks of silence. "While everyone else saw a young black doctor to be questioned, you saw a patient to be healed. While they focused on your race, you focused on my recovery. You are the most skilled, dedicated physician I've ever encountered." The nursing staff began arriving, alerted by the monitors and Andre's call. News of Victoria's awakening spread through the hospital like wildfire, reaching Dr. Wellington and the Blackwood family within minutes. But Victoria wasn't finished. She had something to say that would change everything. Within an hour, Victoria's hospital room was filled with family, medical staff, and administrators, all crowding around the bed of the woman who'd been unconscious for 4 months. Charles and Margaret Blackwood hovered near their daughter, their faces a mixture of relief and bewilderment at her sudden recovery. Dr. Wellington stood at the foot of the bed, her expression carefully neutral as she processed the implications of Victoria's awakening. The experimental treatment had worked, vindicating Andre's approach and challenging everything she'd assumed about the young doctor's capabilities. "Victoria, darling," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face, "we were so worried. The doctors said you might never wake up." "The doctors were wrong," Victoria replied, her gaze moving deliberately to Andre, who stood quietly near the window. "All of them except one." She turned to address the room, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I've been conscious for 3 weeks, trapped in my own body but fully aware of everything happening around me. I heard every conversation, every doubt, every moment of prejudice directed at the man who saved my life." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. "Dr. Santos," Victoria continued, "was the only physician who truly saw me as a patient rather than a financial asset. While others questioned his qualifications, he was developing an innovative treatment protocol specifically for my case. While the medical establishment doubted his abilities, he was working 18-hour days to bring me back to consciousness." Charles Blackwood's face flushed red. "Victoria, you don't understand the complexities." "I understand perfectly," she interrupted, her voice carrying an authority that silenced the room. "I understand that Dr. Santos has credentials from Harvard and Johns Hopkins. I understand that his research on coma patients is groundbreaking. I understand that he treated me with more respect and dedication than anyone else in this room." She turned to Dr. Wellington, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. "And I understand that this hospital's leadership failed to recognize excellence when it was standing right in front of them." Andre watched in amazement as this woman he'd cared for as a voiceless patient became a powerful advocate for justice and recognition. The transformation was profound. From unconscious heiress to conscious force of change. "There's something else," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than any shout. "I've made a decision that will affect all of our futures." Victoria's announcement sent shockwaves through the hospital that would be felt for years to come. With the clarity of someone who'd spent weeks in silent observation, she had developed a plan that would fundamentally change how Mount Sinai Hospital approached medicine, diversity, and excellence. "I'm establishing the Victoria Blackwood Foundation for Medical Excellence," she announced, her voice steady and determined. "A $50 million endowment dedicated to supporting exceptional physicians from underrepresented communities. Santos will serve as the foundation's first director of clinical innovation." The room erupted in stunned silence. Andre felt the world shift beneath his feet, the magnitude of her gesture almost incomprehensible. After years of fighting for recognition, of proving his worth daily, he was being offered not just validation, but the opportunity to create systemic change. "Victoria," he said quietly, "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept," she replied, her eyes bright with purpose. "Say you'll help me build a program that identifies and nurtures medical talent, regardless of background or bias. Say you'll help me ensure that no other brilliant physician faces the obstacles you've overcome." Charles Blackwood found his voice first. "Victoria, this is a very generous gesture, but perhaps we should discuss." "There's nothing to discuss," she said firmly. "I've had 4 months to think about what matters in life, and 3 weeks to witness the difference between genuine caring and institutional prejudice. Dr. Santos didn't just save my life, he showed me what medical excellence actually looks like." Dr. Wellington stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Victoria, if I may, I think there's been some misunderstanding about Dr. Santos's treatment here. We've always recognized his abilities." "Dr. Wellington," Victoria interrupted, "I heard you question whether he should be treating me. I heard you suggest his care was experimental rather than innovative. I heard you prioritize our family's donations over his medical expertise. There's no misunderstanding. There's only accountability." Andre watched as the dynamics in the room shifted completely. The same people who'd questioned his competence were now witnessing his patient, the daughter of one of the hospital's biggest donors, not just defend him, but actively work to advance his career. The foundation will also fund research into consciousness during coma states. Victoria continued. Dr. Santos's insights into patient awareness could revolutionize how we approach coma treatment. His work deserves recognition, funding, and institutional support. As the crowd began to disperse, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred, Andre remained at Victoria's bedside. The woman who'd been voiceless for months had become the most powerful advocate he'd ever had. Why? He asked simply. Victoria smiled, the first genuine expression of joy he'd seen from her since she'd awakened. Because excellence recognizes excellence. Because compassion deserves reward. And because sometimes, the person who saves your life gives you the chance to save theirs in return. The young black doctor who'd entered that hospital room each morning, driven by nothing but passion for healing and belief in human dignity, had indeed discovered something life-changing when his patient finally opened her eyes. He'd found not just professional recognition, but a partnership that would transform medicine for generations to come. Dr. Andre Santos's unwavering commitment to excellence and humanity had unlocked doors he never knew existed, proving that sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in prescriptions or procedures. It's found in the courage to see and treat every human being with dignity, respect, and unwavering dedication to their recovery. The millionaire had awakened, and in doing so, she'd awakened something even more powerful: a movement toward justice, recognition, and the radical idea that medical excellence knows no color, only compassion. The Victoria Blackwood Foundation for Medical Excellence had already begun to reshape the landscape of American medicine. From its headquarters in a gleaming new building adjacent to Mount Sinai Hospital, Andre Santos oversaw a revolutionary program that was attracting the brightest medical minds from across the country. Dr. Santos, his assistant called from the doorway of his spacious office. The residents from the Diversity Fellowship Program are here for their orientation. Andre looked up from the research papers scattered across his desk. Proposals for groundbreaking studies on consciousness, neural recovery, and innovative treatment protocols that would have been considered impossible just months before. The irony wasn't lost on him that the same experimental approaches once dismissed as risky were now being hailed as the future of medicine. "Send them in," he said, straightening his tie. The same tie he'd worn during those difficult early days when his competence was questioned daily. Now it served as a reminder of how far he'd come and how many others he could help along the way. 12 young doctors entered his office, their faces reflecting the same mixture of hope and determination he'd carried through his own residency. They represented the first class of the Foundation's fellowship program. Brilliant physicians from underrepresented communities who would receive full funding, mentorship, and the institutional support Andre had fought years to achieve. "Welcome to the Foundation," Andre began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned his position through excellence rather than privilege. "6 months ago, I was where many of you are now, questioning whether this profession had room for doctors who looked like us, who came from communities like ours." He paused, thinking of Victoria, who was making a remarkable recovery and had become not just a patient success story, but a genuine friend and collaborator. She'd returned to work at her family's real estate empire, but spent her evenings working with the Foundation, using her influence to open doors and change minds across the medical establishment. "Today, we're not just changing individual careers," Andre continued, "we're changing the entire system. We're proving that excellence comes in all colors, from all backgrounds, and that the best medicine happens when we embrace that diversity rather than question it." The young doctors sat transfixed, seeing in Andre not just a successful physician but a symbol of what was possible when talent met opportunity and support. Several had tears in their eyes, remembering their own struggles with bias and institutional barriers. "Dr. Santos," one of the residents asked, "what advice would you give to someone who's still facing the kind of challenges you experienced?" Andre smiled, remembering the countless mornings he'd entered Victoria's room, uncertain of his future but certain of his purpose. "Keep showing up, keep being excellent, keep treating every patient with the dignity and care they deserve, regardless of who's watching or who's judging. Because sometimes, the person whose life you're working to save will end up saving yours right back." As the orientation concluded, and the new fellows filed out, Andre returned to his research, energized by the knowledge that the Foundation would soon announce its expansion to 10 more hospitals across the country. The ripple effects of one woman's awakening continued to spread, creating waves of change that would transform American medicine for generations. The young black doctor who'd once been questioned for his qualifications was now training the next generation of medical leaders, proving that when excellence is recognized and supported, it multiplies exponentially. And in hospitals across the nation, patients were receiving better care because someone had finally learned to see past skin color to the healing hands beneath. Victoria Blackwood had indeed awakened, but her greatest accomplishment wasn't her own recovery. It was awakening a healthcare system to its own potential for justice, excellence, and transformative change.